All right, here we go. Another Ski Like the Pros on FPM. But today it's going to be a little shorter than last time. There's a huge positive response to last week's episode, Ski Like the Pros, where we talked about Rob Hazelwood and we compared that to some of the things that us amateurs have issues with. So before I continue, I want to say thank you for the positive feedback. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing. And we're going to obviously keep doing this more because I think people are really liking it and resonating and learning from it. And speaking about learning, this format and these topics may not be how you best learn. Some people don't really like to overthink skiing. They tend to want to just go out and ski and do the thing and enjoy their time at the lake and get better that way, which is great. And that's super valuable. Other people really see the value in trying to understand concepts and zoom out a little bit and see things from a 30,000 foot view. That's really what we're trying to do here on this portion of the podcast. So we're going to keep doing that. The reason we do that is even on Flow Point Method on the platform, we talk a lot about kind of global concepts because skiing happens so fast, right? You don't have time when you're out there to truly think too much at all. We know that. If you think about more than one or two things at a time while you're skiing, you're toast. It's not going to work. And even at that, when you're thinking, oftentimes you're not going to ever ski your best. I think we ski our best sometimes when we're just going for it, and we're tapping into that flow state or the flow point without really thinking at all. But to get to that point, we have to kind of steep or marinate in ideas and concepts so that our subconscious is starting to pick up on new ways to think about skiing, but also it's starting to process and simplify its understanding. That is our subconscious, its own understanding of skiing, so that when you go out there and you're just reacting in the moment, on the water, in the course, you naturally start making better moves. That's when I think true progress happens. It's not by spot treating and band-aiding your skiing in the moment through thinking. It's by working offline like this, listening in your car while you're driving, watching while you have a 20-minute break to a podcast or watching some skiing of some of the best in the world or of your own self, and trying to think about the concepts, think about skiing in a different way, and then allowing that to exist separate from your skiing on the water, where on the water you're just going out and really experimenting. That's the lab on the water. So these two kind of go back and forth. And that's why I think there's value in talking about these bigger concepts. So today, we're gonna kind of continue on what we talked about last week, which was kind of this idea of, staying connected longer, outbound, hanging on with two hands. We showed examples of Rob in an event, a pro event, the Malibu Open, and we showed some examples of amateurs doing it right, or doing a good job and doing not as good of a job. But what we didn't do is we didn't back up and set up what it takes to actually swing outbound and swing up high on the side of the boat, right? So let's think about this very briefly. To have space before the buoy to be able to execute a turn like you want to, almost more naturally or automatic, which is the dream, right? Having a turn happen just automatically because you've done all the other things well. To have that happen, I would say and this is not set in stone, but I'd say there's 3 or 4 kind of key fundamentals. I'm gonna say 4 key fundamentals. So I'm gonna use some drone footage of a couple pros, and we're gonna go over those 4 fundamentals that are kind of prerequisites for swinging high up beside the boat and setting yourself up for better turns and better passes through the course. Now, I'm not gonna get in depth. I just wanna cover these 4 prerequisites for being able to swing high on the boat. But I will touch on other concepts that we'll just have to take on faith right now, and maybe we'll get into those at a later date. So the first prerequisite is speed at centerline. That means your ski speed, your skier speed, you have to have a sufficient amount of speed at centerline to be able to then swing high up beside the boat. Obviously, this is a gate turn, and we'll see a great path towards the gates and outbound into one. What I want to note is we talk a lot about angle, and we can see this angle right here of the ski path, right? And we hyper focus on angle, but what we really need to think about, and this is what I talk about, I've been talking about for decades. Terry Winter and I have been talking about this. This is kind of, you know, the old West Coast slalom approach was really one of the most key fundamentals was speed before angle. And what we mean by that is setting up your body so that your center of mass is ahead of your feet. Our feet down there, and we see the line of action of the rope. So the rope is pulling this way. There's a certain distance that the feet are behind the rope or the line of action right here. That's the distance. Within reason, that's what creates speed without load. Okay, so this is one of the best skiers in the world. And I wanted to set that up because we see that if you can set up that scenario where you have the line of action, the rope is pulling you and your feet are slightly behind that line of action. Now, take this with a grain of salt, but that is the way you build speed without using a bunch of load on the rope. Having that position allows the skier to build speed and essentially ski into more and more angle as they get closer and closer to the wakes. And that's really the magic of speed before angle. Now, why that matters is because if you don't have speed here, right here, if you don't have speed, you will not be able to swing high on the boat. If this skier's path, instead of here, if the skier's path was more, they turned in earlier and they're heading more straight at the ball, you can just see inherently two things. Number one, they're not on a great path to one, but number two, they're going slower in this second scenario with the red arrow. And that's the key takeaway. Speed at centerline not only allows you to swing high, but it means that you've skied into angle. And that's really what we need to focus on. How to generate speed, that goes back to body position. We talk about skiing's positional a lot on FPM, and that's a key fundamental here. So rule number one, to swing high up beside the boat into the buoy, you've got to have speed at centerline. Now, speed at centerline means you have momentum. You've built momentum in the system. Momentum is mass times velocity. So you have velocity, right? Velocity, speed, essentially, and your body weighs a certain amount. That's mass. Now, secondarily, we've got to use that mass to continue to have that mass stay against the pylon or against the handle going out, meaning the rope cannot go loose or saggy or droopy as you transition to start swinging outbound. So from this point right here, all the way outbound, we have to keep that rope tight as a cable as long as we can outbound. If we don't do that, we lose connection to the boat and we lose that valuable energy. The boat is literally, as the skier goes outbound, the skier wants to go this way, but the boat is trying to pull the skier this way as the skier goes outbound. And those arrows, those green arrows pulling the skier in, are valuable energy, where you are stealing energy from the boat and you can continue to use that energy much like a tube behind the boat to whip up beside the boat, right? But if as soon as you come off edge right here and you transition to the new edge, if you suddenly feel like you do that, where you go straight at the ball, most likely that's because you had the boat pulling you nice and strong here, and then at this point where there's a kink in the path, the pull through the rope went basically down to zero. That doesn't make sense to everybody, but that may make sense to some. Those arrows are the force through the rope. If you can't keep the force through the rope, you lose connection to the boat and you lose that valuable whip energy that you get from the boat. So that's number two. You've got to keep the rope tight on your way outbound. This really means for most of us, you have to limit the rebound effect. So what I mean by that is through the wake, skiers have not only a pull through from the rope, so we'll say it's this red arrow here, but they also have load through the feet here, right? And those two arrows are trying to do different things. You can see the red arrow is the boat pulling you, trying to pull you down course. The blue arrow is the ski trying to push your feet back up course, all right? Now what happens is if we go just a few frames more and we get in this habit of trying to continue to load to the second wake, what happens? We've got still high load through the feet here, and what do we have? We've got high load through the rope here. So you can see those opposing arrows instantaneously. If we hold our cut too long or too strong, we often end up seeing skiers in the couple frames after that point, getting completely pulled to the inside where that rope load pulls them here and the ski load basically goes to zero. And that's when that ski, you know, we often feel that. That's when that ski gets flipped completely outbound and then we end up going straight to the ball. Okay? That's what we mean by controlling the rebound. How do we do it? Well, I'm not going to get into the details. I'm just trying to get into the prerequisites for swinging high on the boat. But I can tell you this, it requires in the work zone, which this is controversial, but I say the work zone, I actually call it the cone of acceleration. It's from here, when you make that turn, progressively towards center line. That's what I say is the work zone. This acceleration cone right here where it's progressively increasing the work you're doing and the work that the boat's doing on you by increasing your lean, increasing your dynamic movement towards the wake. If you do that really well, then you don't need to hold your cut after center line. Now this, for people who are at slower speeds, longer ropes, this is probably not ideal. I would just say you're probably gonna end up looking more like this, where your acceleration cone is here, where you're building into kind of that second wake area, because you don't want to just get popped off at the first wake or at center line rather. But either way, you want to build a progressive cut towards the wakes. That's rule number one for controlling that rebound of the rope. But secondarily, you have to be not increasing the load from here outbound. If you're increasing the load or increasing your lean anytime after center line, rather than simply trying to maintain or actually starting to reduce that load, you will spike the load here somewhere and you will get that huge rebound effect where you get completely pulled inside, and we all know what that feels like. You have angle and then suddenly you go straight to the ball, and we don't want that. So controlling the rebound is all about managing the pressure through your feet so that by the time you get to here, you're still strong, right? But you're not trying to add anymore. And why would that work? Well, because we've got that load from the boat there, but we want to preemptively start reducing the load through the feet, right? Those two arrows are opposing. If we have high load through the feet, we're screwed when we go to start to transition. If we have lower load through the feet, we can control the feet. They don't want to shoot out so much. And that just basically means starting to come up a little bit out of your lean, not transitioning, but starting to come up slower, but a little sooner for a lot of people, provided you've done that progressive build into the first wake, will reap a lot of benefits as far as being able to stay connected, going outbound, swinging up on the boat. That's number two, tight rope going outbound, controlling the rebound of the rope and not getting pulled inside. The third prerequisite for swinging high on the boat is limiting the deceleration through the feet. So just imagine this. I've talked a lot, all right? We talked about speed at center line. That's pretty intuitive, right? If you're slower here, you're not gonna swing up as wide and early on the boat. Kind of makes sense, right? That's rule number one. Rule number two is keeping the rope tight, right? So that from center line out, you're still connected to the boat, and that boat's essentially pulling you all the way and swinging you, whipping you like a tube up beside the boat here, right? That's rule number two. Now, rule number three is you want to limit the deceleration through your feet. So what that means is you built all the speed to center line, you're getting better at keeping the rope tight going outbound, but you don't want to have your feet in a mode or your ski in an orientation that's going to create deceleration. The last thing you want to do, if you've got a tight rope and you had speed back here, the last thing you want to do is have a bunch of deceleration through your feet, right? So what does that mean? Well, think about it. It's trim theory. We talk about this a lot on FPM. The higher the attitude of the tip going outbound, the more your feet are in front of you, the more you're decelerating. If your feet are in front of you, you're obviously decelerating. So what we want to do, third rule, is we want to limit the deceleration through the feet. So if we're coming into the buoy, on the way outbound, we don't want to have the feet super far in front of us. So it's about figuring out through center line and outbound how to manage that shooting of the feet outbound, how to keep our bodies over our feet. Now, we talked about this last week. You can go back and look at it, but one of the rules is the more compressed you get at center line, right? and this is for every skier, 30 miles an hour all the way up to 41 off. The more compressed your body gets at that transition zone through the second wake and outbound, obviously the more your feet are going to go in front of you. It's anatomically, you're just built that way. The more compressed you get, your ankles can't flex that well, you end up sitting back. The ski tip goes up, the tail goes deep, you're creating a lot of deceleration. So you could have had everything perfect. Speed here, rope tight, the boat's swinging you out, but suddenly at this point right here, you have all kinds of deceleration because the ski went tip high, set a hard edge, and you'll end up still on a great path, and then you'll end up straight at the ball. So rule number 3, you've got to limit the deceleration through your ski, and that means finding balance on the ski through transition as you head outbound. Swinging up on the boat, more balanced. Drills like the cut and coast drill. Just finding ways to stay stacked over your ski as you move outbound into the buoy, up beside the boat, is a very key fundamental. Now, you're always going to be decelerating moving outbound into the buoy. You're always going to be decelerating. I'm not saying you want your feet underneath you or behind you as you swing up beside the boat. What I'm saying is you want to limit how far ahead of your body your feet are as you swing up to the boat. So whatever that means to you, a lot of people, that's why we talk about load through the right arm or the lead arm heading into one, even arm into center line, even load through the arms, and then transitioning to that lead arm allows you to keep moving over your feet. That's one of the tricks that people use, but there are many tricks people use or keys that people use to try to stay balanced over their feet heading outbound. That's rule number 3 though. If you don't limit the deceleration through your feet and keep that ski tip more or less down, you're gonna slow down too quick, you're gonna head straight at the ball, and you're gonna feel disconnected from the boat. As we move outbound and set that new edge, we talked about this last week, but just a rule of thumb is, how's the spray coming off the ski? If it's coming off and trailing back at a very, very shallow angle, that usually means that you're not decelerating. You ever done this where you get out of the water and you just lean way back after you get up and you just feel that load through your feet? You feel all the spray coming off in front of you and coming over you. That spray is indicative of a high deceleration position or a high drag position. The higher the drag, the less the spray trails off nicely, and the more the spray is going to be coming off at this steeper and steeper angle. So that's one thing you can do when you're watching TWBC or when you're checking out your own skiing is, how's the spray coming off the ski going outbound? If it's coming off shallow, you're probably in a pretty good orientation trim-wise with the ski. If it's coming off steeper, you're probably weight back and the ski's decelerating you more than you'd like, and you're leaving a lot left on the table. There's a lot more potential in your skiing than you think, but it's just paying attention to some of these key fundamentals. Rule number 4 for trying to swing high on the boat before the buoy is keeping your mass as close as possible to the handle, right? So mass here, trying to keep your mass, actually we could say pylon as well, but handle is the most immediate thing in people's minds when they're skiing, so it's easier to think handle sometimes, but trying to keep your mass as close to the handle as you can, right? Now, why does this matter? Well, it's pretty simple. We've all kind of swung the handle around, messing around on the dock. When you choke up on the handle, just like a figure skater, when they bring their arms in tight, all else being equal, they start spinning faster, right? You put your arms out, you spin slower. It's just simple physics that we don't need to get into, but it's a rule that we all intuitively know. Think about this. The farther the mass gets away from the handle, let's say, instead of being here, let's just imagine that the mass was somehow over there. You can see how this mass distance from the handle would swing much slower up beside the boat. It wouldn't swing as fast as this mass would, because what? Because that red mass is closer to the pylon. It's a shorter rope. It's going to feel more whip up beside the boat. The further your feet, the further your mass, the further your shoulders, the further your arms get away from your body on that way outbound, the closer you get to that the yellow circle here, and the slower you swing up beside the boat. It's pretty simple, but it's really hard when you're skiing to rationalize this. But that's why when we break it down here, it starts to make more sense. Now, this is all words. Let's wrap this up, because it's been too long, with a quick comparison of 2 pro skiers, drone overlay, so you can see what I'm talking about. Here we've got 2 pro skiers from a pro event I've overlaid their skiing. I've tried to line the boat up as best I can for both skiers at 41 off. But this again holds true at 15 off, 30 miles an hour. But I want you to notice a couple things. You see skier in the red vest is a little bit further down course when they've turned in for their gate, and the skier with the yellow vest is a little further up course. So we talk, I'm sure you've heard coaches say before, if you can turn in a little later for the gate and not get slack, but maintain speed, it's often better. The results are better into one and the rhythm that you establish. Here, I'll show you why. Red skier, further down course when they turned in for the gate. Let's watch what happens by the time they get to that right-hand gate ball. As you'd expect, at that right-hand gate ball, they're just about in the same spot. And I'd say maybe the skier with the red vest is a little further up course. Hard to tell because the resolution gets worse as I zoom in. But let's check this out. As we go outbound and we get past, there we go, we get past the whitewater, what do you notice? Skier in the red vest is a couple feet up course and has more belly in their swing, right? So you see skier in the yellow vest here, skier red vest has more belly to their swing already. They're already swinging higher on the boat. Number one, let's just go back. They had a little later turn in here at the gate, which means that their trajectory to get to that right-hand gate ball went a little later, and they'd have to be faster to get to that right-hand gate ball, whereas the other skier was a little earlier and they're probably a little shallower to get to that right-hand gate ball. So that's the first thing you need to notice. But really it comes down to speed at center line, just like we talked about. What's your speed right here? The more speed you can generate to that right-hand gate ball at the start, the quicker you'll afterwards swing up on the boat. And you can see it right here, right? It's interesting. Also, you can't really see it because of the resolution, but the rope is tighter for red skier than for other skier. And what you notice is the path they skied into, because of their speed back here at Centerline, the path that they skied into was much longer than the path that this skier skied, right? The inside path is a straighter line. The outside path, the red path, is a longer line. And that means they actually had more speed. If they end up at some point down the lake, right here, they end up in the same exact spot. So what do we want to do? We want to have speed at center line. We want to stay connected here as we swing outbound. We want to limit the deceleration that we feel in our ski through our feet. And we want to keep our mass as close to the handle. All those things help us ski this wider path instead of skiing this straighter path at the ball. We're going to end up in the same spot more or less, but there's a couple advantages for skiing that wider path. Number one, you see the trajectory here is a little bit better. Number two, what you saw was the skier in the red vest is ahead here. They have to be. If they're skiing a higher line earlier, they have to be ahead, right? But watch what happens. Because they're ahead here, they're able to start slowing down sooner. They swing higher earlier, but they're able to start decelerating sooner just by the nature of the swing, right? You can't stay out there forever. So if you get out there a little sooner and you get swing a little higher earlier, you have more time to decelerate. So watch what happens. Our biggest problem is, as all skiers, we get slack at the finish of the turn, often at our hardest passes. But that's because we get anxious, we jump inside, we lose the rope, we sit back, all those things we've talked about today. But really, if we just stayed confident, had one or two keys, we understand this whole system from center line out and how to swing high on the boat properly, then everything else falls into place. We end up at the same spot as we would have been if we were on that narrow line, but we're already decelerating, right? If at this point I'm ahead as the skier in the red vest, I'm ahead of what I could be doing as a skier on the narrow path, but then a couple moments later, my narrower self caught up with my wider self. That means that the wider self is decelerating. Let me do that one more time. So it's the distance from here to here instead of the distance from here to here, right? The red distance is longer. But for the same amount of time, if I travel a little further in the same amount of time on the inside track, that means I'm actually going faster when I'm closer to the ball. That's not what we want. So the guy in the red vest on the outside track, is actually going slower as he's closer to the buoy, or she, I'm sorry. I should be using pronouns properly. But regardless, they catch up to each other. The wider path skier is already slowing down more. And watch this, as they round the buoy, red vest is up course, and you can see the narrower path ski's not getting rotated as early. The ski is further down course than this ski, right? This ski is further down course, and the speed management is going to be much harder because everything that happened from the gate turn to centerline to the swing outbound and that riding the path high on the side of the boat, that all dictates what happens at the finish of the turn. So I hope that makes it clear, and I'll let this play out actually because it's quite interesting. So you can see the rope's tight. Really, one of the other keys we'll get into at some point in the future is how quickly on the backside of the ball here can you get the rope tight again, right here to begin accelerating again under the load of the boat, right? The sooner you can get that rope tight on the backside of the ball, the sooner you can be on your way under the power of the boat. And that's what happens if you've got that, if you're in the red vest and you've got that higher, earlier line, you slow down better at the finish of the turn, which means you're able to match back up with the boat sooner, less slack. And that means you're able to get accelerating sooner. So you're obviously on a earlier line than you would be if you're on that narrower path into buoy 1. And look at the difference as we come into buoy 2 at 41 off. Look at the discrepancy now. All because of a couple things slightly different at that gate turn and that path through the gates. It's now compounded exponentially coming into buoy 2. And really, it's about turning. But to turn properly, you've got to do all the things right. You got to have speed at center line. You've got to have a tight rope. You've got to limit the deceleration through your feet. And you've got to keep your mass, find a way to keep your mass close to the handle as far outbound as you can so that you can stay on this high and early line as we see here. And now, look at this path discrepancy, right? We've got a straight and narrow path versus that high and early path. And again, the red vest is way ahead, which means they had more speed. But watch this. Red vest is now up course again. And that means from this point here to this point, they ended up decelerating much more. And it's not a function of any Houdini magic tricks, it's a function of setting things up right. So that is the lesson for the day. That's how we analyze the pros. Thanks for joining, because the important thing about this is to realize that skiing is fun, it's simple, but sometimes to get it simplified in your head, we've got to be able to talk about these bigger 30,000 foot view, literally concepts, and break them down into bite-sized pieces so that they make sense in your head. You can process them. Your subconscious goes through the motions. Maybe you visualize a little bit so that when you get to the lake, you're not thinking. You're trying to find a new feeling, because a new feeling means a new outcome. Same feeling means same outcome. Remember that. We all want it to feel the same, but better. It can't. If you want to improve your skiing, you have to have a new feeling. New feeling equals new outcome. Here's how you do it. You zoom out, you do the hard work, understanding how things work, simplifying your approach or your concepts or your beliefs in your own skiing, and then allowing that to marinate so that when you get to the lake, you have a different understanding and you can go ski, maybe with one key in your head, maybe with a ski partner helping you with their feedback, whether or not you're moving in the right direction, or filming. Those two, it's a long game. Don't expect immediate results now. We're going to keep talking about this stuff. We're going to keep saying it in different ways, and we're going to keep listening to your feedback. So please like, comment in the video below, share it, and let us know again if this is what you want to hear and what you want to hear more of. I know we're going to talk about lefties. We're going to talk about Cole. We're going to talk about Freddie Winter versus Ali Nicholson. We're going to talk about some of the best in the world and the differences, but we're also going to highlight how they're all the same, meaning even though they look different style-wise, some of the mechanics are very, very similar. And that's the key takeaway, all right? It's understanding the mechanics so that you can simplify in your own head, apply it to your own skiing, and hopefully get better from there. I'm going to stop rambling. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of Ski Like the Pros, and we are going to see you next time.